What if your brain isn't broken, it's just depleted? The brain does not produce consciousness, but it makes it possible for us to experience it. And for this reason alone, we do need to look after the brain. In this episode, I'm going to challenge the narrative that brain fog, anxiety, and mental decline are inevitable. My expert guest today to discuss this with me is Dr. Salzman. Dr. Andrew Salzman is a Harvard trained physician, biomedical entrepreneur, and inventor with 30 years of experience in drug discovery and development. He holds over 50 patents and is a globally recognized expert in inflammation, cellular aging, and NAD research. We're also going to explore how restoring one molecule, NAD+, can support the brain's natural power to heal, grow, and stay sharp, even as we age. Welcome, Dr. Salzman. I'm very, very, very excited to talk to you today. This is a topic that I know my audience is going to love to hear. The brain has a clock, but you can actually rewind it. Now, that's fascinating. Can you talk about that?
Well, we know that the whole process of aging is inexorable in one sense, in that it's progressive. And of course, everyone eventually ages and passes away. There are no exceptions to that, not only in humans, but in animals. In the entire kingdom of biology, aging is ever present. And it has an evolutionary advantage. So it's actually useful in some sense to have aging. But as we've learned more about it recently, we understand that it's not as fixed as we heretofore thought. And there are ways to shorten or reduce the amount of damage during the aging process, to slow it down, if you will, and ultimately to extend its range, to lengthen life.
Oh, that's very encouraging. Yeah, we can't get away from getting those wrinkles and getting old, but we can improve the quality of our. And so many people think that dementia and mental cognitive decline is inevitable, but we can also work on that. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I think that's what's very, very encouraging. So let's talk about brain age. How do we measure brain age?
Well, we know that in the young person that there is a gradual improvement in the quality of thinking, and the sharpness and the intellect, and that probably peaks in the early 20s. And thereafter, there's a steady classic decline in our mental acuity and our ability to have good memory, to have good recall, to be able to manipulate concepts. And by the time that one is in the 40s and 50s, that becomes fairly evident. And of course, once you get into the 50s and 60s and after that, it's universal. So there definitely is a progressive decline in the brain function, just as there is in all other organs. Aging doesn't spare any organs. So if we look at the eye, the ears, the chest, the cardiac function, muscular function, immune function, digestive function, sexual function, all of these have a decline, some faster than others. And even within certain organs, there are differences. But the brain is particularly important because the brain is the most active organ. 25% of our blood flow is going to the brain. It's under tremendous stress as we age. And so it's not surprising that when we see people in the 70s and 80s, it's very significant, this decline.
So, okay, so what do you, but there is a lot that we can do about this. I mean, there's a lot we can do in terms of, because I know with the work I've done, when you manage your mind, you can actually get more out of your brain. And I know there's some neuroscience that actually shows that your brain actually gets better with age, but it all depends on how you've used your brain and what you're doing with in other words, what are you doing with your lifestyle? What are you doing in terms of how you're thinking, how you're managing stress, how you eat, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a tremendous amount of research. I know that you know of that around this area, that we can do something. And I think that's the message that I'd love people to get, is to understand that there is something we can do, because people are also under so much pressure, as we all know, in our very modern, technological, fast-paced age. So there's a lot of brain fog complaints. I mean, these are the sorts of questions I get all the time. I'm sure you do.
Right,
How do I improve brain fog? Is it inevitable? How do I improve this? I don't want to get cognitive decline. Does it mean I'm going to inevitably get dementia? So what can we do about that? And I know you've been quite specific in your research. You've really been looking at what helps to support brain health and what really detracts from brain health. Could you talk a little bit around that?
Well, the gradual loss of brain function is multifactorial. There are a number of different factors, but what I focused on, is really the role of NAD. And this is a central molecule for the entire body, but in particular for the brain. We've done numerous studies looking at how NAD regulates brain function under normal conditions, but also under very stressful conditions. And we believe that the maintenance of normal NAD levels will go a long way to sustaining normal function and slowing the aging process, and hopefully ultimately preventing some of the long term problems you mentioned, such as dementia and so forth. So we believe that the focus for us and hopefully for the community will look at NAD very carefully and see what we can do to support that.
Can you tell the listeners what NAD is? Not everyone's going to know what
Yeah.
that is.
NAD is probably the most important molecule, I would say, in the body. It's involved in 500 different reactions. It's a small molecule. It's a normal metabolite, if you will. We make it. We make it in every cell. And NAD is responsible for all of the major functions for thinking, for moving, for digesting, for sexual function, for immune function. There isn't anything in the body that isn't touched by this amazing molecule. And
Wow.
the reason for that is it's involved intimately in the critical reactions which drive the cell's function. So if you remove it or if you reduce it, the cell doesn't perform at its traditional level.
Wow, that's amazing. So what sort of things can affect, because you said it drives function. So what would affect it not being able to do what it's supposed to do? I
Well,
mean, controlling
give
500 functions is quite phenomenal.
Yeah, I'll give you an example for the brain. So when you think, if you do a functional MRI, for example, of someone thinking, someone smelling something, someone thinking, someone having an idea, the brain lights up in that region and you can see it. It's like you turn on the switch. So there's a
Mhm.
tremendous amount of blood flow going into the area of the brain that's working and a lot of metabolic activity. If NAD levels are okay and they haven't fallen significantly with aging, then that can proceed very well and you can be sharp as a tack and be, completely cognizant of everything going on. But as your NAD levels fall, that metabolic process slows. So when instead of being able to think sharp and come up with an answer quick and do a crossword puzzle or so forth, it just all slows down to standstill. Even as you get into the 80s and 90s, it may not be present even enough to sustain any kind of normal function. So brain function is intimately linked to the level of NAD within the neurons.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know it's throughout the body as well because it does have, if you improve your NAD levels in the brain, it's going to make a difference in the body. Can you speak to that?
Well, every cell in the body uses NAD for every
Hmm.
function. Okay. So the brain controls a lot of our function. Obviously, it controls not only our ideas, but also our movement. It controls our hormones. It controls really our sense of pain. So the spinal cord. So everything ultimately comes back to the brain. It's the master regulator, the symphony conductor. So if the brain is impaired, because of NAD deficiency, then all of the concomitant functions, the functions below that will fail as well. I can give you just a few examples.
Yeah.
Let's take menstruation. So when you have a normal brain function in your pituitary, you're creating hormones all the time that are regulating your ovary and other bodily functions. As the NAD levels fall within the brain, the signals that go to the ovary will start to fail. And so you can have ovarian dysfunction, even though it's coming from the brain. Ultimately, the ovary can't perform as well. Same thing would be true for sexual dysfunction, for arousal. That's ultimately coming from the brain, but that will diminish with falling NAD levels. And then it has effects on sexual function peripherally. So everything in the brain that drives processes downstream in the rest of our body will start to slow down when the brain itself cannot be supported. And that's why NAD levels in the brain need to be sustained in our view.
Wow. So do they naturally decline as we age, the NAD levels, and you're
Un-
countering that with your work?
Unfortunately, that's the case.
Okay.
And it's a lot more dramatic than you would think. We're not talking about a small fall. If you take a person in their 20s and you compare that to someone in their 50s or 60s, you would be shocked to see that the levels have fallen about 50%. So this is not a small dip. We're talking
That's
about
huge.
a major plunge in NAD throughout the body, in every organ.
Wow. And that is inevitable in every human as they age. And so what would
Yes.
that purpose be? Because I mean, if you think about that, we need to be sharp till the end kind of thing. So is there some evolutionary purpose behind that? Obviously the fact that the point I also want to make is that if that's a natural decline, your work is countering the decline and all the things we're doing to improve. And why would we do that if it's natural? I mean, obviously we want to
Yeah.
all be functioning
Yeah.
well. That's a kind of double-edged sword question.
It's a fantastic question because people are well aware that different animals and plants live for different lengths of time. I
Hmm.
mean, a mosquito might live for a couple weeks. I mean, thank heavens for that, actually.
Yeah, thank goodness.
if you look at a tortoise or the lake shark, there's a lake shark under the North Pole. It lives to be 400 years old.
My goodness.
Tortoises are 150, 200 years of age. Mosquitoes 2 weeks. So why the difference? Why do some animals live for a
Mm,
very short time and some animals live for extremely long time? And why are we in the middle? Why did that evolve? Well, the reason was that each animal, when it came into its environment, into its ecological niche, it found a trade-off. So there is a trade-off. For example, mosquitoes, bumblebees, they have fantastic energy. They're very successful. They make millions of these bugs, and they're running all about. They're avoiding predators, and they live there a few weeks. They reproduce, and they're gone. That's a very effective way of evolving, and you don't need a lot of education and training to become a bumblebee. I mean, when you're born, after a couple of days, you're an adult. You're doing pretty well. Whereas
yeah.
something like a monkey or a human, it takes years to
Mm,
develop the knowledge of how to survive in your environment and how to socialize properly and hunt for food. And so it's very tricky. So there's a long process of education and of training in order to be successful as a human. Well, therefore, the lifespan has to be long enough for you to grow up, to become an adult, to be effective, and ultimately to reproduce. Once you've reproduced, you don't really confer too much advantage. I mean, there is some advantage in
mhm.
elderly people. During evolution, an elderly person was 30. So there is some advantage in having experience. It helps the social group understand how to handle new situations. It has recollections of old things. So there's an advantage perhaps to have people in their 30s. But after that, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, this did not exist during evolution. The average survival was 25 years until recently, until 10, 15,000 years ago. So we did not evolve to become elderly. There's no evolutionary advantage to be 80 years old. So what we're witnessing now is the effect of nutrition and proper health care that propels people to live decades longer
Mhm.
than evolution ever intended or selected for. So the aging process, which was fine for the 20s or 30s, has suddenly been put into a new situation which was never anticipated, if you will. And that's what these are the problems of healthcare that we see in older people. We didn't evolve for that, but we're facing that now. It's a good thing, but we did not evolve for that length of time.
So we need to have a plan to live better because we're living longer. And a lot of the work I do is around obviously the mind stuff, the mind
Yeah.
management, which improves brain function and neuroplasticity and that kind of thing. But we can do so much. So enter the work that you've done because you've spent 30 years researching NAD and pretty much the world global expert when it comes to NAD. One of the things that you talk about is CD38, which is a molecule that seems to be quite a villain. Can
Yeah.
you explain how CD38 works and why it becomes more active as we age and what can we do about that and maybe link
Yeah,
that back
sure.
to NAD?
Well, as I mentioned, NAD levels fall in all of
Mhm.
us. Okay. So a 50-year-old will have half the NAD of a 20-year-old. Why is that? Well, the two reasons. We make less of it, we make less NAD,
Mhm.
and we burn through it faster. Those are reasons. It's pretty simple.
Okay.
It turns out that the real problem of those two is actually that we're using it up. We're burning it up faster. We make
Okay.
it, there's a little less that we make. This is true. And with some interventions like diet and so forth, yes, we can make a difference. But the real killer is the fact that we're using it up like crazy as we get older. And why is
Mhm.
that? What's the reason that we're burning it up? Well, there are proteins, there are enzymes in our body that use it up, and those skyrocket. The levels of those skyrocket as we get older. So that's the cause, and CD38 is the prime culprit.
Wow. So our metabolism is changing dramatically, which we all do know when we get older.
Yes.
But
Yes.
one would think it almost sounds counterintuitive because you would think that it's slowing down, so you wouldn't use as much, or would be more efficient, or use of NAD would be more efficient. But it's the opposite. It sounds like the NAD
It
is working much
and
harder.
that's right. If you look at the CD38 levels in a 10-year-old,
Mhm.
they're pretty low. We don't need much CD38. We use it to fight infection. We need a little bit. If you look at a 60-year-old or an 80-year-old, they're super high. Let's take
Mhm.
ovarian function, for example. So in a little girl or in a young woman, there are low levels of CD38 in the ovary. Very, very low. There's NAD. The ovary is full of NAD to keep the eggs in good condition. They need to
Mhm.
be in good condition for decades in preparation for being fertilized. So the NAD levels are fine. CD830 levels are low. Now, when you get into your 40s or late 40s or early 50s, suddenly the CD38 levels rise in the ovary, and they rise specifically in the area near the eggs. And they rise so much that so little NAD is left because it's chewing it up. That's what CD38 does, that you don't even have enough energy for the egg to leave the ovary. So you stop ovulating. That's called menstruation. That's called menopause. I'm sorry. So
Menopause.
menopause. So menopause is actually a direct consequence of not having enough NAD in the ovary to allow the egg to leave. So if you were to stop this increase in CD38, if you could hold it down, then the NAD levels would stay okay, and you would continue to release eggs until you're 50 or 60 or 70. Animal studies, we can do that. We can see mice that are the equivalent of 90 years of age. They still ovulate if the
Wow.
CD38 levels are kept low. Yeah.
Have you had human trials on that? Or just
Well, the question is, how in humans can you keep the CD38 low, or how can you keep NAD at a good level? Is really the
that's the
fundamental
question.
question. In the brain, in the ovary, everywhere, in muscles.
Yeah.
What can we do to maintain healthy, I call it healthy, normative levels of
So it doesn't have
NAD?
this massive decline.
That's right, right. So there are only two ways to do that. Either you take a supplement to boost up the provision of NAD, the supply, or you block CD38 and some other enzymes to slow its use.
Okay.
Okay, so what we've done in our approach, we have a capsule that we sell called Youngr. What we do here is that we provide a way to boost up the NAD. We can talk about that later. And we also include other natural molecules which inhibit CD38, so it doesn't work as well. So that prevents the NAD from being chewed up. So it's the combination of those two which is most useful in keeping NAD levels where they should be.
Wow. So this is the Wonderfeel brand, the main capsule, the Wonderfeel, the Wonderfeel brand capsule, and it's got that balance. So we're having to be at a stage in our development as humans where we actually have to help the body along. And so these inventions, literally, because I mean they are literal inventions of understanding more about the physiology, but taking those and turning them into something that we can put back in our body to counter that progression. And that's where you talk about countering brain age. You don't, instead of it reducing inflammation and reducing all these kinds of things, we have to work at it. It's not something that otherwise it's an inevitable decline. So we can reduce the inevitability by stepping in and taking active steps, progressive active steps,
That's right.
proactive steps.
That's right. I mean, before, if you go back 50 years or 100 years, people just kind of shrug their shoulders about this. Well, you get old. What,
Yeah.
that, death and taxes, those are the things that you can't, I mean, it's going to happen. So people kind of shrugged their shoulders, said there's not much you can do about it. You can treat diseases, and that's what the medical field developed to do. So Alzheimer's and arthritis and, cancer. Okay. So the medical field developed all of these techniques and processes and doctors and specializations to deal with each of the many, many, many diseases that happen as you age. But another way to look at this is, instead of going after each one of these problems that eventually will take place, is to actually slow the aging process itself and thereby prevent the introduction of all these diseases later. And that's the concept. It's a new concept. You can only do that if you understand why people age. So, right, you need knowledge of the process. You need to understand the biology. Why do people get older? Why do we age? And therefore, you have to do research. And that research is what has led us to the point we're at now, where we start to have some ideas about treatment and
Which is so
prevention.
interesting. Which is so interesting. Just as a little side note, it would be lovely if you could develop an NAD for taxes.
Yes.
That's your next goal. That's your next
Right.
goal, Dr. Salzman.
Right. Well,
yeah. So so that's really interesting. So we actually can, we can do something about it. And so it's a proactive approach that you're basically teaching people to do, and it's through supplementation. So there's so many supplements out there. There's so many different things. It's very confusing for people. And then there's so many, obviously there's exercise helps and all those kinds of things. How do you give a nice, balanced, rounded approach? And how does NAD as a lifestyle fit, or the capsule that you've created as a lifestyle fit into this whole story?
Into that, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. There's so many different supplements out there. It can get very confusing. Let's try to focus really on the supplements in the NAD field if we can.
Of course.
If we look at that, if we go to the store, what we see primarily out there are lots of different supplements that when you swallow them, they will boost up in some way your NAD by providing a precursor. By the word precursor, what I mean is something that gets turned into NAD. We can't give just NAD by itself. If we try to do that, if you swallow NAD, unfortunately, it can't get into your cells. So it's a good try, but it doesn't work. It
Doesn't work.
doesn't work. Yeah. People have tried that. So what they did when that failed was to say, let's go back one step or maybe two steps and give something that can get into the cells and then get turned into NAD in the cell. That was the idea. That's what a precursor is. And
Yeah.
so you'll see on the market people who are selling NR, which is nicotinamide riboside. So that's a precursor that gets turned into NMN, which is the next step. And then NMN, some people give that like we do. Some people give that, and that gets turned into ultimately to NAD. So you'll see different steps along the way where people have tried this and that. And by and large, those have been pretty good. They're not bad. So NMN supplements, you'll surely see those online or in the store. Right, those are a precursor. They work fairly well. They will boost up NAD levels. That's been proven in humans. But still, you have the problem of the breakdown of the use of NAD engineered by, say, CD38. That's the main protein we've talked about. So you can give a supplement and you can bump up your level,
Yeah.
but then the CD38 will chew it away.
Oh gosh.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like having a bathtub where you're pouring water in and you have a drain where the water is going out.
The plug doesn't
So,
work properly.
well, you can turn up the spigot and have more water going into the bathtub,
It
and
keeps going out.
the water will go up a little bit, but if the drain is big enough, it may not make any difference. You're going to have a lot going in and a lot going out. So CD38 is that hole in the bathtub. It's the drain.
Okay.
So
You have to plug the drain.
yeah, so these supplements basically have just said, turn on the spigot, give more, hope for the best. And what we're saying is that's fine, but also plug up the drain a little bit. And that's the way you'll get the level to come up. So you need
That
to
makes sense.
give the water, but close the drain down. And so we've included in the capsule some natural molecules that plug up that drain, if you will.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. So that's a great analogy to think you need the bathtub full. But if you don't have the CD38 blocked, in other words, have a bath plug that actually works, it's going to drain out. And then that cycle is just endless. So it's kind of going literally down the drain.
Exactly.
And I think that's what happens with a lot of supplements in other areas as well, is that you've got to have them proportioned in the correct way in order for them to actually do what they need to do. I love your concept of being proactive you're going to age, but we can change how we age. But then it's active steps. I love that because it's what I teach, not from an NAD perspective, but from a mind perspective, because that's my area of expertise, is you can just let your mind do any of. You can just let the anxiety take over. You can just let the anger take over, whatever. But that's is affecting how the brain and the body function. Or you can step in and do something proactively, and almost like insurance policies. And that's kind of what you're doing as well. You are almost giving your body an insurance policy.
Well, look, as I said before, we evolved to be very active and functional and terrific into our 20s. And that's where evolution kind of stopped, right? Because you'd already had children by then and it didn't make a difference. Now we're in a completely different situation. We're living to 70, 80, 90, even 100. So we have to intervene. We have to take action. We have to take steps to keep ourselves as a young person, even though we weren't designed for it. It's a design issue. The human was not designed to be 80 or 90 years of age, designed to be 20 years of age. So if you want to live to be 80 or 90 and feel like a 25-year-old, you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to take proactive steps. And I think the way to do that is to focus on NAD and to maintain that at the best level possible, and then slow down the aging process that way.
So you are really in the field of longevity, but not just increased lifespan, but it's increased life quality.
Oh yes,
so
yes. As I said, right. If you look at all the diseases that happen over the years and the decades, they kind of pile up as you get older.
Yeah.
It's not just that aging is associated with these diseases. Aging actually allows all of these problems to happen. So if we can slow down the aging process, we're also slowing down the dysfunction and disease. If we look at the mind, the ability to be sharp and have good mental acuity and to think is a very complicated machine, if you will. The brain is probably the most complicated piece of matter in the universe. It's very complicated. Well, if you don't have supply of energy to it, if you can't defend it and slow down the aging process, it will be, less and less useful as you get older. So that's why you need to step in early. Don't wait till you're 60 to start thinking about aging. It starts when you're 20, your 20s.
And that's
The, yeah.
something that is very good. I'm glad you've raised that point, because the mind needs a healthy brain to work through, because they're not the same thing. They're two separate things. But if you
Yeah.
don't look after, I used to teach my patients from young. When my parents would bring their kids in, I'd say, look, you teach your children now how to prevent aging now at this young age, because it's how you manage your mind. Then when you're managing your mind more effectively, you're going to be much more tuned into your body, and then
Yes.
much more tuned into making good lifestyle choices. And I'm
Yes.
sure you've seen that, because I saw this a lot, so much in my practice, and I know you practice as well, is that if you don't manage how you're thinking about your life and how you're responding to experiences, you don't really care about the brain. And then if the brain and the body are not functioning like they should, that feeds back into the brain, and we have this feedback loop. So you're talking about proactively really engaging in setting up the most healthy state. You're going to age, but you can intervene, but you're going to have to do something. So you
Yes.
can't just sit back and take any old supplements. It's got to be very specific. So people need to be educated. But in
Yes.
the last few minutes that we've got left, what would you, because the NAD is like as you said, it's a metabolite. It's providing fuel, and every single cell needs it. We cannot
Hmm.
function without that. You don't have the fuel. The equivalent maybe for my listeners is, in the mind, I talk about peace being a fuel. If you don't have
Hmm.
peace, you stay chaotic, and that generates chaos in your body. So
Yes.
with the concept of it being a fuel, can you talk more specifically about how would they, just specifics about
Well,
the incorporation into lifestyle? Yeah,
let's take
there
an
we go.
example. Take an example of memory. That's one of the first things that starts to go as you get older, right? People can't remember. And that affects all of your life and your decisions and your ability to be independent, your ability to work, to be a productive member of your family and society. So every bit of memory that you have, every remembrance, every recollection requires a tremendous amount of energy to build a structure
For sure.
within your mind that's there for not a day, not a week, but for years. And so that takes energy, and it has to be protected. The neuron that's making that memory for you, that memory of your father, or your mother, or whatever.
Hmm.
Okay, that takes a lot of work to create that. And that energy is provided by the blood, which provides the oxygen, and by the NAD, which provides the fuel in the cell to make the memory. So that is why you have to provide the basic fuel to your mind if you want it to function normally and to keep that memory there. If you don't do that, you're going to find yourself in your 60s and 70s and 80s becoming more and more forgetful, and the memories will slip away.
It's kind of like never switching off your computer, and then you wonder why your computer doesn't work. And
Yes.
here you are, your mind, trying to make your brain work, but your brain can't work because it hasn't been recharged. It doesn't
Yes.
have any energy left. And
Yes.
don't you think, Dr. Salzman, that our lifestyles as well, even though people are living longer, we've also got the whole deaths of despair. We've also got people dying 8 to 25 years younger from preventable lifestyle diseases, which goes to your point of these lifestyle diseases are preventable. The more you take it, and not just exercise and green juices, it's actually specific supplementation, specific management of mind. These are quite specific things that we also need to do in order to not just to age well, but also not to die early from preventable lifestyle diseases.
Well, that's right, because I mean, this is a little bit off the subject of NAD, but that is very true
Mm.
what you've said. For example, depression or anxiety actually has effects biochemically on the ability of the brain to organize itself, to make structures, to create memories, to function. People who are depressed, for instance, don't have good memory. And they don't
Mm.
have, it's actually, there's a connection between your feelings and your preparation of your soul, if you will, of your thinking process,
Yeah,
and the brain's physical ability to structure itself to retain
exactly.
its key functions. And of course, NAD is part of that. If you're missing
Exactly. Mhm.
NAD, no amount of work or lifestyle change is
Mhm.
going to help you. But if you maintain good NAD levels, you still have an obligation or a responsibility to maintain your vigor and your good mental health, and to have good nutrition and exercise and all the other things that go along with keeping the brain active and functioning so that your mind will work. It both have to
Yeah.
go together hand in hand. It's not
You
enough
have to,
just to
yeah.
take a supplement. There's
No,
no,
you've got to do it all.
yeah, of course.
But if you
Yes.
don't have the NAD and you're trying to do the exercise, there's a certain amount that your body will generate as well from the exercise, but it's still not quite enough as you
Right.
age.
You can have a beautiful car that's
Mhm.
fantastic. If there's no gas in the tank, it really will not perform. It just doesn't
Exactly.
make, so
So that's the key
The
thing.
NAD is the fuel,
The
it's the
gas in the
gas.
tank. It's the
Yes.
fuel. That's the
Yes.
fuel. So tell us about the actual process. How should we? You said start as early as possible. what is the
Yes.
regimen that you recommend then?
We recommend that people take it in the morning. We have a capsule called Youngr. It's from wonderfeel.com. You can find that on the web, a lot of information about that. It contains not only NMN, which is the major booster, but it also has
Mhm.
resveratrol and hydroxytyrosol. These are natural molecules from grapes and from olives, respectively, that help block the CD38, slow it down. Okay, so
The
they're
plug in the
plugging up the hole in the bathtub. Yes. So
Mhm.
by putting these together in the right combination, we have what we hope will be a way to achieve and sustain good NAD levels. And we have a lot of feedback from our customers, and most of them write back after a few months. It's not something you're going to take once or twice. You'd actually have to take this all your life because the aging process is not going to stop. So you
Mhm.
have to continuously get in there and fight this decline in NAD. We've had anecdotes of people we had a lady actually in Australia, in Sydney, who was a crossword puzzle maven. She's really good at that. And her husband became concerned as she developed vascular dementia, and
Mhm.
she was able to live, but she didn't have the same function as before. She couldn't do any crossword puzzles. He found out about our product and then wrote to me subsequently about 3 months after that, after she'd started, and said she's back to doing two. She wasn't doing four crossword puzzles a day, but she was doing two. And for him, that was very meaningful. Of course, for her, it was life changing. She was able to think and to interact. So we've seen things like that on the brain side. We've also seen changes in people with arthritis. See a lot of changes in skin as people age. We've had patients write back their skin is more elastic. It doesn't have brown spots. The hair is
Wow.
thicker. So it really aging is a systems problem. It's not just one
Mm.
organ. It's everything.
Mhm.
Touches on everything. But
Everything.
the brain is the most meaningful because you can lose everything, but if you still have your mind, you still have a life. So that is, of course, the focus to preserve that function.
So NAD, thank you that you explained that really nicely. NAD then is a fundamental fuel for to make everything else work. So if you're taking NAD, you can still, I assume people can still take the other supplements that they're taking for maybe magnesium and various different things that coenzyme Q2, whatever. There's so many different things out there. But what I'm hearing you say is that whatever regimen works for you, exercise and all those things as well. And I'll add in please focus on your mind management. You are
Mhm.
saying that to make all of that really work, we need the energy. You need the gas in the car. So as you say, it's not
Yes.
no good having this beautiful car with all the leather and all the,
All the
all the supplements,
gadgets.
all the extra. Yeah,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
no fuel. So one
Yes.
needs the brain needs fuel. And this is a basic fundamental need. NAD is a basic fundamental need. But what's so important, and I'm just summarizing it for the listeners, is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, think of the bath analogy. If you have a tub and you don't have a plug that works, it's going to all drain out. So you can add as much as you want in, but it's going to drain out, and then you
That's right.
don't have the energy. So it's really important that you fill it up, but you also have the plug that works.
That's exactly right. The other supplements all have a specific role
Yeah,
and they can do what they can do in certain places. But if you're missing the fundamental driver, the fuel, really
you
the
got a
rest,
problem.
you have a big problem. Yeah.
You have a big problem. Wow, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much. And I know that my listeners have a special deal that if they, and we're going to put that in the link, that if they go through our podcast to get Wonderful, they're going to get some kind of wonderful discount. But all those details are in the link. And
That's right.
Dr. Salzman, you've got, I mean, 30 years of work in this field. You are totally, I mean, this is your life's work. And
Right.
I can see you're very passionate about it. And thank you for
Yeah.
what you've done. And thank you for,
Mm.
it's actually so simple. You need energy. And if you don't
It
give
is.
your body that energy, NAD is the energy. And you're not telling people to throw everything else out and just take NAD. You're telling people to do what you're doing, but make sure you have the NAD. Otherwise,
Yes.
what you're doing is kind of going down the plug.
Exactly right. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk to your audience and explain how important it is. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your work and for being here today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you again. Take care.